Good morning. I'm Shyam Kamath. I'm Dean of the College of Business at CSU Monterey Bay, and I'm honored to address you on a subject which I have been involved with for the last 15 years, namely the development of clusters of innovation across the globe. And so the title of my presentation, and this is the big picture that I'm going to provide of cluster development across the world and the lessons that such cluster development have provided for us to pay attention to as we build clusters here in this area. And the title is Ingredients for Cluster Success, Attracting the Right Companies for Cluster Development. There is a paradox today, and the paradox is that with the death of distance and the world being flat, a la Thomas Friedman, why is it that place matters? Why is it that particular locations matter? So I think it's important to understand what makes places successful. And I'll spend my presentation very quickly doing three things. I'll try to show you that the world is not flat, that in fact it is spiky. And second, I will try to generally talk about clusters and what clusters are. You're all very familiar with the topic, but I just want to set it in context. And finally, why do clusters succeed and why do they fail, and what lessons can we walk away with? My own involvement has been with clusters in Brazil, in southern Brazil, a cluster of environmental businesses called Parque Sapiens, or the Park for Human Beings. We're involved with an eco-cluster in Rwanda and an eco-cluster in Thailand, and clusters in the Philippines and India. And I was very fortunate to have lived in China in one of the special economic zones just as they were beginning, and wrote the first paper on special economic zones many moons ago when the subject was still in its infancy. So this is what I'm going to cover and answer these questions that have come as a result of the work that I've done with clusters. So why the world is not flat, and population is the obvious way to look at this. This work that I'm going to show you in the next 4 slides is from the work of Tim Gulden of the University of Maryland's Center for International and Security Studies. And it depicts global development, how it's been using some very unconventional measures as to how the world has not been a spiky place. And if you think of fractals, and you think of those spiky places, as you see here, population, and population is a very imperfect measure of concentration, and especially of productivity, it is a very imperfect measure, yet you can see that at a fractal level that goes down into the localities and then into the sub-areas in every place. So is it with economic activity. So this is done using UN data, US census data, including national atmospheric and oceanographic and atmospheric administration data using satellites. So here you see the concentration. I hope you can see it. It's the gray, these are the gray spikes that you see, and the height of the spike very often measures the density of what is being presented. So let's look at another area, and this really becomes stark. This is economic activity. It is called light-based regional product. So it's satellite pictures of the world where you look at light, and with that light you mix it with the data on economic growth or economic activity to come up with an estimate of where the economic activity is. And you can see most of the world here is dark, while the spikes are just in a few areas. So the world is definitely not flat. It is spiky, as you can see it here. If you look at the next slide, it looks at innovation, which is the topic of this particular forum. One part of it is about innovation, social innovation, cultural innovation, and economic innovation. And this is using patent data. And if you look at US patent data and then correct it with World International Patent Organization data, again you see that it is the spikes are even more spiky. Okay? And then you look at the last one, which is star scientists in a spiky world, and this is measured using citation counts of articles, and again, the same situation re-emerges. It is only some parts of the world that are spiky. In fact, if you take the 10 mega regions of the world, and there are mega regions, the one we are in is the San Francisco, Los Angeles, San Diego mega region. Another mega region in our country is the Boston, Washington, New York mega region. In fact, the biggest one is the Tokyo mega region with $2.5 trillion in output in 2010. Those regions account for only 6.5% of the population in the world, but they account for 43% of economic activity, 57% of patented innovations, and 53% of the world's most cited scientists. So once again, the data is overwhelming. How does this connect to what we are talking about? Because if we think of FORA and our region, it is a very productive region on the three-legged stool that President Ochoa mentioned. But here is an opportunity to leverage that and grow that. And while I'm not recommending economic concentration, that's the way the world has worked. It's because of the talents that are in an area. So we have an opportunity to develop this area as yet another cluster of excellence. This is a picture of the major clusters in the United States. And again, you see the phenomenon that it is places, it's locations, in spite of the death of distance and the claim that the world is flat. These are the clusters that run across the country. And in our region, of course, we have the microelectronics, the hardware and software, and the media, and the venture capital cluster, which Bud, the next speaker, is very much a part of all of these, and so is Larry, the speaker after, I think, after that. That is indeed, again, you can see the phenomenon. And the geography of work, again, and we are, unfortunately, because of our clusters having a very limited scope for they're clustered around two areas, and that's a good thing, but on the other side, it means that a lot of the work that people seek goes out of our region. And again, you can see the clustering of work here. So what are clusters? Michael Porter from Harvard Business School is considered the guru of clusters. He started this debate in 1981 with a book which was followed by work which specifically focused on clusters in 1998, and he defined them as geographic concentrations of interconnected firms, suppliers, service providers, related firms, and associated organizations in particular fields or areas. But this has now come to be revised, because if you look at the San Francisco region, it is actually a conglomeration of about 8 or 10 distinct clusters, including the venture capital cluster, a transportation cluster, a media cluster, a cluster for advanced accounting firms, for IP legal firms. All of these cluster, and so these are overlapping clusters. So even though you may start with a particular focus, they soon develop other clusters around the starting cluster. Of course, Silicon Valley and Hollywood are examples of clusters, as are the special economic zones of China and Europe's foreign direct investment zones. And then ultimately the supercluster is the city or region. So why has traditional economic development strategy failed? Because the focus is on economic development at the cost of social justice and the environment, very often. Easter Island is an extreme example of that. Failure to understand and capitalize on strengths, which President Ochoa referred to when he referred to the three-legged stool. Not thinking strategically, and he again referred to that fact when he said we need a comprehensive look as to see what those strengths are. Scattershot and diffuse efforts, which we have been very often accused of, lack of critical mass, and a lack of focus on a holistic goals, that is worrying about social justice, as he referred to, and to environmental issues. And the lack of integration of efforts, too many jurisdictions and not getting together to do this. Economic development has very often been one shot, one type, one-on-one, that is not looking at overlapping effects and more than one connection between different parties, and one-sided. So why clusters matter is, of course, because of the productivity they produce. As I've shown you with the graphs, they generate tremendous economic development, and both Bud and Larry are going to talk about the impact of those clusters on a particular economy. And of course, they result in economies of scale, in marketing and other competitive advantages and talent pools. How many of you have been to Hong Kong or Singapore? Well, you know that those are super clusters, because what they've done is specialized. They're smaller than the Bay Area and the Central and the Monterey Bay Area and the Bay Area combined. But their output and their economic activity far exceeds what we have. Though Silicon Valley is very impressive. If it were ranked as a country, it would stand 22nd in terms of its economic output in the world, just before Sweden and just after Belgium. So that's very impressive too. So again, brings out the point. So it's important for key competitive linkages and competitiveness, and for generating economic activity and jobs while paying attention to social justice. So this is the basic framework that dominates thinking about clusters. It's Michael Porter's, and most of you can't see this at the resolution it's at because it's going to be surrounded in a moment, but it is essentially 4 items that Michael Porter has emphasized. The demand side, so what he calls demand conditions, which means local demand conditions as well as a connection to a larger world of demand, is very key. Second is factor conditions, which is supply conditions of labor. Talent is key, as Larry will emphasize, and Bud will too. But it's also the related and supporting industries that develop. And also, as was mentioned earlier, it's firm strategy, competitiveness, and the structure of industry that matters. So this is the model that has been used. We, after doing the work on clusters in the countries that I mentioned, decided that there was much missing. And so we developed a larger model which actually looked at another 12 factors, another 8 factors. And these surround that. We call it the General Economic Management System model, or the GEMS model. And in fact, the factors that Porter emphasizes in the research we have done turn out to be not the key ones. The key ones are spread among some of those and some of these ones. So let me go through them very quickly. This is the business climate. It's very important that the business climate be appropriate. And in the survey, you'll see business climate comes very high in the results. Industry networks, how a place is connected, and we are blessed with that. We are connected well thanks to transportation and telecommunication networks, but we need to get better at it. And something that Porter ignored was public policy. We find that that is very important to the development of a cluster, as you'll see in a moment. The concentration of firms, or what economists call agglomeration effects, is very important to cluster success. We looked at innovation and entrepreneurship, and that is very often those are cultural reasons for areas having innovation and entrepreneurship, but it can also be inculcated, incubated. And historical factors, what economists call path dependence. Path dependence is the very fact that Frederick Terman, who had asthma, relocated from MIT to Stanford, and then encouraged his students, including Hewlett and Packard, to develop businesses, and got the Stanford administration to change the way they did, changed history in some way. But it was purely because he had this respiratory issue that he left MIT and came to Stanford, and therefore changed the world as a result. That's a very interesting phenomenon as an example of path dependence. And then the element of chance, just dumb luck. We all know that who have started businesses, that dumb luck is very important, but chance is very important. Think of Hong Kong. It was because China went communist that Hong Kong grew, because it was the entrepot. It was dumb luck from Hong Kong's point of view. And the anchor effect, having a large firm that's anchored, and Singapore is an example of that. If you read Lee Kuan Yew's From Third World to First, you'll see how that is very important. The anchor effect of fooling Hewlett-Packard and IBM to locate in a very poor city by creating a golf course and bringing them to the golf course and showing how wonderful it was. They got the anchors and built on that anchor. And so that's the model we used. And so if you think of these, Porter called his model a diamond. We call ours a gem. And so beneath that are the 4 hard factors and the soft factors. So you can divide these up. And so we surveyed the world for clusters. So we got 137 clusters in 32 countries whom we were able to survey, with 51% of the respondents in the US, but 49% outside. And we also surveyed the tenants, but the response rate, perhaps because they were extremely busy, was much lower. And so we had 57 respondents from 16 countries. And I just want to very quickly walk you through this. Very successful were a little less than half, somewhat successful were also similar, and they were less successful and not successful at all clusters, and you see the distribution there. We did what's called a factor analysis, and what you see here, and I will not go into the details of the analysis, but you see here is a clustering in terms of rank of the factors. We had actually 15 factors when we broke it down, and then we ran this successive cluster analysis, and we arrived at the results which are shown here. The red ones are interesting, that the socio-political climate turns out with government and public policy, business climate, and talent pools as the most important factor. So we call that the business environment, public policy, and labor factor, and using techniques in regression analysis, we have identified the impact of those 4 groupings. First one called business environment, public policy, and labor. The second one, input prerequisites, which is factor conditions and other issues on the factor side. Then park-specific issues that we were surveying technology parks, and supply and demand issues. Porter emphasized supply and demand. Turns out that they are the least important as a result of our analysis of what clusters are about. We also looked at failure factors, because that's important. We could get it wrong. The high cost of entry and operation was the #1 failure factor. The lack of infrastructure and facilities was #2. Improper location was #3. And lack of skilled labor, again labor, was #4. So the major conclusions are that the most important factors have to do with things soft and with the availability of talent. So we've got to get the soft factors right. But the hard factors are also important, such as networks, agglomeration effects, attracting anchor firms, innovation and entrepreneurship, and the availability of capital, infrastructure, and suppliers. The factors that are less important are the presence of related and supporting industries, the regional presence of collaborators, competitors, and demand conditions. But they're not unimportant, they're important too. And factors that hurt, I've already talked about. And when it came to choice criteria, you can see the location, the industry focus, companies' goals, and the quality of the cluster management is very important. So what are the implications for us? The location of the Monterey, Salinas, the region, going down to King City and beyond, and up to Santa Cruz and beyond, is that the location is a very important one. It is part of this mega region. It, in fact, is the middle link of the mega region. And so it's a very important advantage. Business and socio-political climate, public policy and cooperation, and labor factor conditions are key. That's where the role of the university that President Ochoa talked about and that Larry is going to talk about is very key. So the local support of enterprise and entrepreneurship, business-friendly climate, people have questioned that very often with regard to our region. Climate for risk-taking and business innovation, local results-oriented business cluster. We have plenty of that. And business and government collaboration is very key. The attraction of anchor firms and firm agglomeration is critical. Availability of quality infrastructure and capital and supply links is important. And the cluster focus is key initially, but then developing surrounding circles of clusters. So based on that, we've been doing some thinking, we've been sharing ideas, and given the region and its focus on the environment and on social justice in the university at least, and beyond, all of us should be concerned, we are looking at, we are seeing ideas that have to do with environmentally responsible industries, or what we call responsible industries, that try to mix, think of the quadruple bottom line: people, ethics, planet, and profit. And ideas like biological control agriculture, precision agriculture, sustainable hospitality management, which we have been working on a project, John Avella, who leads our hospitality management program, ecotourism, responsible design and development, specialized social venture capital, which Bud has been instrumental in bringing to the area we were talking about earlier today. So if you look at these, and really it can't be planned in a micro way, but the conditions can be created. So that link with Silicon Valley and the Bay Area becomes important. And if you think of responsible firms, there are a number of firms that are experimenting with what's called responsible business. GE, First Solar, Patagonia is a big leader in the area. In fact, its founder, Yvonne Chenard, just wrote a book called The Responsible Company. California Technologies, Water Health International, the Water Institute, SC Johnson, Whole Foods. These are some of the firms that we can focus on. And so there's a key niche for what is called a responsible cluster. And here's some examples. I'll leave you with them. And my time has run out, well, long ago. So I want to point out that these are clusters that exist across the world. We are not going to be unique. So if you think about the cluster in Brazil or the cluster in Norway, it's a renewable energy and environment cluster. Or if you think about the environmental business cluster in Ontario, Canada, or the one in Reykjavik in Finland, it's a solar cluster. These are all successful clusters where, given our strengths, we can develop similar responsible clusters. Thank you very much.